In this lecture, we're going to be talking about sexual orientation. And to start off, I just want to make sure that everybody understands exactly what sexual orientation means. So in previous chapter, we talked about gender identity, and I think sometimes gender identity gets kind of lumped into sexual orientation, but they're actually two separate things. So when we were talking about gender identity in previous chapters, it was the idea of which biological sex you are. That's the, how you were born with, what genitalia you were born with, versus which gender you feel like the most you identify with. So this is where we get into the transgender and a man wanting to become a woman or something like that. So that is different from sexual orientation, which is basically just which gender of people you are attracted to. So we need to kind of separate those two big topics. So sexual orientation is the gender that a person is attracted to physically, sexually, romantically. So we've kind of got these three categories: heterosexual, homosexual, and bisexual, which you're all probably familiar with those terms. There's a couple of different models that we can use to look at sexual orientation that have been created by some of the researchers. Dr. Kinsey, we've talked about him before. He was one of the most prominent sex researchers. He came up with this scale that was on a continuum. So before Kinsey, there was really just, it was kind of more black and white, clear cut. Either you're homosexual and you're attracted to the same sex, or you're heterosexual and you're attracted to the opposite sex. But Kinsey kind of put it more on a continuum that would allow for a little more fluidity in that attraction. And then Klein was the next one who kind of expanded on Kinsey's continuum. So here's a look at Kinsey, which this model was good in the fact that it kind of took away those categories of being so clear cut, where we've got so exclusively heterosexual on one end of the spectrum and exclusively homosexual on the other end, but you could be somewhere in the middle to where, you're kind of attracted to both. Maybe you are mostly homosexual, but every once in a while you're attracted to the opposite gender. So we kind of can see that this is like a scale that doesn't have to be either one or the other. The problems with this is that it doesn't change over time. That's one of the problems. So someone maybe, when I was younger, yeah, I had girlfriends, but now that I'm in college, I've realized that I'm more interested in men. So time change is one of the problems with Kinsey's continuum. The other is that it just focuses on behaviors, like actual acting on, and it doesn't really have any way of determining what the desire is. So say, for example, someone is attracted to the same sex, but the only behaviors that they've actually acted on are with the opposite sex. So they would fall into having homosexual tendencies, but based on this scale, that wouldn't be on this chart at all, because it's only based on what behaviors that you've actually acted on. So then the Klein grid kind of fixes those problems a little bit, because it includes past, present, and then ideal. So even if it's something that you haven't actually experienced in a behavior, if it's something that you have a fantasy about, or something that you just have an attraction to that you haven't actually acted on, then that would go in that ideal category. And it does have the range, again, just like we saw with Kinsey, but it just adds in that it could be an ideal that hasn't actually happened, but it's something that you've thought about. So it's a little bit more accurate when we look at Klein's orientation grid. We talked about theories previously as well, so I'm just going to go over really quickly a few of the different ideas of how people think sexual orientation is determined. Again, theories are not perfect. It's not to say that one of these is correct and the other one is wrong or anything like that. This is just how scientists or people in the psychological field have kind of tried to figure out, well, what makes this sexual orientation develop. So the first would be biological theories. Those are things having to do with biology, based on things like birth order or genetics. Your DNA, people would look for differences in, is there a gene that's making some people be heterosexual while others are homosexual? And things like hormones and even physiology, which would be differences in your body structure. So is there some difference in the brain makeup that makes one person heterosexual and the other one homosexual? There have been studies on finger lengths, the different finger length patterns of, men tend to have a longer ring finger than index finger and vice versa for women. But then they found, homosexuals tend to have the opposite pattern of what their sex should, what would it say normally. So anyway, the physiology would just be some kind of body structure differences in. Developmental theories would look at something happening as you're growing up. So this is where we get into Freud as far as the fixations, where he talked about the Electric complex and the Oedipus complex. Other developmental theories would be gender role nonconformity, which is the little boys that like to play house or with dolls, and then girls who are more into masculine type of activities. Typically, that could be something having to do with the developmental as they're growing up. And then peer group interaction is another one as far as development. It's which types of friends people are associated with as they're going through puberty and the changes in the biological aspect. And then behavior theories, as we talked about before, are all about that reinforcement, punishment, and reward. So something external is giving them either a reward or a punishment for a certain behavior, and then that's reinforcing that behavior. So behaviorists would say, if you had a bad experience with someone of the opposite gender, then that was kind of like a punishment. So that's going to be negative reinforcement of wanting to be attracted to that opposite gender. So then in a behaviorist theory, whatever is giving you a reward, you're going to want to do more of, and then whatever is giving you a punishment, you're going to want to do less of. So that's how a behaviorist would say someone forms their sexual orientation. Sociological theories would be that it's learned through culture. So this would be maybe something in the media. As we have seen, there's a lot more acceptance in the media right now of homosexuals. So the sociological theory would say, well, if we are getting all of these messages from the media, then more people are going to want to go that direction, versus if there's more heterosexual images in the media, then people are going to want to go that direction. That will all be based on what society says and what our culture is going to say is acceptable, or models that we might look at, role models as far as family members or friends or just people that we're around. And then finally is the interactional theories, and this is kind of a combination of a lot of different factors. So an interactional theory would say there has to be a couple of different things going on, and those are influencing each other. So say someone is born with DNA and hormones that would help them to develop a certain sexual orientation, but then when that's reinforced through some kind of reward, then that's, those two working together, and it's more of a, it can't just be one or the other. It's got to be a few different theories of how someone would figure out what their sexual orientation is. So again, theories are not 100% accurate as far as this one's right or this one's wrong. It's just kind of a different ways of looking at how something could occur. So those are the different theories on sexual orientation.